All right, let's jump right in. We're about to look into a topic that most people assume is a total battleground, the Quran versus the theory of evolution. But what you're going to find is that the real story, when you look at the source material, is way more surprising and, frankly, a lot more interesting than you'd think.
I mean, this is the big question, isn't it? It's at the heart of so many debates between science and religion. And for a lot of people, the answer feels like a really simple yes. But is it really that black and white? That's what we're here to find out, using the source text itself as our map.
So this is probably the idea you're most familiar with, the assumption that the religious story of creation and the scientific one are just two totally different tales that can't possibly both be true. We're going to poke a few holes in that assumption by, actually looking at what the text says.
Right, so to really get to the bottom of this, we've got to push past all the noise and go straight to the source. Let's actually check out the verses from the Quran and see what kind of picture they're painting about creation.
The sources we're digging into point out some really key verses about where life and people come from. And what's interesting is, they aren't just one-off lines. When you put them together, they start to look less like a single snapshot and more like a process. So, let's take a look.
Okay, so right off the bat, this verse says that all life has a common starting point, water. And what's so wild about that is that's also a fundamental idea in modern biology, that life began in the water. It's a pretty fascinating parallel to kick things off with.
And then there's this. This verse uses the image of a plant. It's talking about a growth from the earth. That's not the language of something happening in an instant, right? It sounds more organic, like a development that happens over time, using materials from the earth.
Now this one is huge. The idea of being created in stages is right there, spelled out. This concept of gradual steps, of a process happening in phases instead of all at once, is really at the center of this whole conversation. The text itself is introducing the idea of a sequence.
And this whole stages idea gets even more specific in another verse about human development. It lays out a super clear, step-by-step path from simple stuff all the way to a complex being. It paints a picture of creation that's dynamic, not static.
Okay, and you've got to catch this detail because it's really important. The text makes a clear distinction between how the first human was created, from clay, and how his descendants are created, from a humble liquid. It's suggesting there could be two different processes going on, one for the very beginning and another for everyone who came after.
And if all that wasn't enough, check this out. The text basically encourages a scientific approach. This verse is telling people to go out, explore the world, and observe for themselves how creation began. That's a call to investigate, not to just sit back and believe without looking.
So, we've seen that the verses themselves are a lot more complex than people usually give them credit for. But stick with me, because this story is about to take a really unexpected historical turn that changes everything.
I know what you might be thinking. This is a totally fair question. Are we just taking our modern scientific ideas and trying to shoehorn them into an ancient book? It's a healthy skepticism to have. But the history on this one has a huge surprise waiting for us.
Just look at these two dates, 1377 and 1859. That's a gap of 482 years. The name on the left, Ibn Khaldun, wrote his masterpiece centuries before Charles Darwin was even born. So, what could he possibly have to say about any of this?
So first, let's be clear about who we're talking about. Ibn Khaldun wasn't some random guy with a wild theory. We're talking about a giant of intellectual history, a founding father of entire fields of study like sociology and economics, a deeply respected Muslim scholar. And here's what he wrote.
Yeah, just let that sink in for a second. He talked about a gradual process of creation and said the higher stage of man is reached from the world of monkeys. He wrote this in the 1300s. He's describing a progression from minerals to plants to animals and ultimately to humans. This little piece of history completely flips the script. It shows these kinds of ideas aren't just a modern invention.
So, after all that, where are we? We've looked at the Quranic text itself, and we've unearthed this absolutely stunning piece of history. It's time to put it all together and maybe rethink that conflict we started out with.
And this is really the key takeaway from the source material. The Quranic text seems to be open. By talking about creation in stages, from common materials like water and earth, it doesn't slam the door on the idea of evolution. It doesn't confirm it in a modern scientific sense, for sure, but it also doesn't deny it.
And that's the final question we're left with. Knowing that the Quran itself talks about gradual creation,
And knowing that a brilliant Islamic scholar wrote about a connection between humans and the world of monkeys almost 500 years before Darwin, how does that change the conversation we're having today? It suggests that maybe the relationship between faith and evolution is a lot richer, a lot more complex, and a whole lot older than most of us ever thought.